Hey everybody, welcome to SawStop's channel. You are in the right place. My name is Nick Sawyer, Sawyer Design, and I am taking over SawStop's channel once again. Today I am here to go over a few of the jigs you may have seen in my last video so that you have all the information you need to make them yourselves. If you haven't seen that video yet, no worries, we'll get those linked at the end of the video so you can head on over and check those out. For now, we're going to start with the L fence and we'll get right into it. Alright, kicking things off, we'll be starting with the L fence or my SawStop 5 horsepower ICS. To begin, we'll start with a 1/2 inch piece of oak and setting the saw to a steep angle. While remembering that safety is first, we're going to take a light cut vertically along the edge of the board, while focusing on keeping pressure down forward and pushing the board against the fence to taper one edge down to about 1/4 inch. This creates the lower horizontal part of the L fence. With the taper made, the next step will be to step over to the router table to cut a rabbet along both back edges of the oak piece. This rabbet will make a strong joint to fit the horizontal piece of the jig into the vertical adjustable portion of the L fence. Once cut, we can use the tenon as reference to align the fence for the other half of the joint with a stop dado in the vertical section of the fence, which I chose to make from 3/4 inch Baltic birch plywood. Once cut, the dado stop locations can be transferred back to the oak piece, marking where to remove the haunches from each end of the tenon. I chose to stop the dado rather than cut it through on the table saw, which would have been easier, was to ensure the thin edge at the bottom of the plywood didn't just snap off. Multiple tenons, like a breadboard end, would have been an even better option. Before assembly, while we're here at the router table, we'll make some slots in the vertical plywood piece to allow height adjustments of the L fence during use. Now let's bring everything together. We'll start by gluing 2 small blocks onto another stationary vertical piece. These blocks will act as vertical adjustment alignment guides for height adjustment. Once those are in place, we can glue the vertical and horizontal pieces together to form the adjustable L. And while that sets, I use this time to clean up the reference edge along the taper. Once dry and with the L assembled, it's time to add the T-slot bolts with knobs that we'll be using for adjustability. Transfer and drill the bolt location through the stationary vertical board in the back after transferring the location of the top of the slot in the vertical piece we cut earlier. To keep the T-nuts from turning, we'll cut a small stop dado in the back of the stationary vertical piece. This will hold them in place. I added a little hot glue to keep the T-slot nut from pushing back out while trying to tighten the knob. Okay, let's see it in action. Bonus optional step here is to add some dovetail tracks on the back side to make clamping the fixture to the fence a little sleeker. And it was a little hard to get out of the lower position, so I decided to add a little grip to the front of the vertical piece. Alright, now let's see it in actual action. To set it up, simply start by clamping the L fence to your table saw fence, and while in the low position, it serves really well as a more comfortable reference while working with thin stock, and by positioning it just above the blade, flush with the arbor side of the teeth, this is where it really shines, whether you're pattern cutting funky angles or flesh trimming veneer to panels. The taper serves twofold. One, it allows for easier handling of thin stock, giving you a reliable reference edge without sacrificing control, and second is it allows for flesh trimming even with small reference surface areas, and without sacrificing rigidity and stability of the jig. The L fence provides precise control and easy setup with flexibility for a variety of applications. With the L fence done, let's move on to the next jig, or jigs rather. First up is a Kumiko style hand plane manual thickness guide. Start by dadoing out the width of your stock by the depth you want your final stock thickness, plus 1/8 inch. Next, add rabbets along both sides of the dado to create a track for your hand plane to follow. These rabbets should match the width of your plane's body. The plane's blade width is the maximum width stock you can use with the jig. I then clean up and fine-tune depth with a router plane and shoulder plane, then cross-cut a piece to insert as a stop at the end of the jig. For obvious reasons, I usually make these to be project-specific. It's designed for refining thin stock by hand, and while this jig works well, its romance wears quickly. To increase efficiency, I switched to a version that uses a fence rather than a track after cutting the purfling strips out on the bandsaw. With the purfling thickness, we need a reliable way to cut precise miters for the purfling at the corners of the box. Using an 8/4 scrap, I cut a dado that matches the width and depth of the purfling, and then chopped off one end at 45-degree angle. This will serve as a reference point for making accurate miter cuts with the chisel. I first cut all the ends off of the stock at a 45 and found that making a heavy cut, especially maple, with one pass cleanly was difficult. So I found getting it down to a rough miter and then just honing in the last little percentage of a degree with the chisel makes for a much more pleasant and pleasurable experience. To rough cut the miter, use a saw guide across the material track. To make the saw guide, I simply used a combo square and a saw to establish that rough angle crosscut across the track of the jig. Last step, optional, cut a low section halfway back the jig, the depth of the track. This will just make precisely fitting the purfling much easier. A 90-degree rotation of the purfling in the track also allows this to make some killer tidy 3-way miters. This last jig is a combination sled that handles both crosscuts and miters by using just one miter bar. The sled rides in a single miter slot, and you can switch between crosscutting and mitering by moving the sled between the left and the right slots. To start, I prefer making the miter bar from a hardwood for durability and ease of tuning, but a commercial miter bar works just fine too. Measure the width of the miter slot with calipers and fit the bar snugly, ensuring there's no play. Too tight is better than too loose. We'll fine-tune this fit later. Attach the base to the miter bar such that when the sled is in the left slot, the blade cuts through the center of the base, and when shifted over to the right slot, the left edge of the board is just left of the blade. Go ahead and make that cut while you're here. With the miter bar in place, position the sled in the left miter slot with the blade lowered and riving knife removed. Slowly raise the blade up and cut into the bottom of the base, near the back of the board, and scoot it forward but not all the way through the board. This will make up the zero clearance slot through the center of the sled. Now you can square up the fence to the blade using the cut that we just made. To do that, attach the fence with one screw at one end, allowing it to pivot. To square it up, I use an 1/8" stock in the slot as a reference, and to easier access attachment of the fence over on the bench. You can also do this at the saw using the blade as the reference. With a square, adjust both the front and back fences to the blade or reference. Once aligned, lock the fence in place with a clamp opposite the pivot end. After squaring the fence, secure it with a second screw at the opposite end and a few more along the length of each fence. Repeat for the back fence. Or utilize a parallel edge of a scrap piece to set the opposing fence, as it's less important to be perfectly square. And there's lots of ways to set up a sled. This is just the approach I took on this one. Skin your cat in whatever way pleases you. Now let's test fit the miter bar. If it's too tight, a simple trick is to mark the edges with a crayon. I like a grease pencil, and the high spots will reveal themselves after sliding it back and forth a few times. A shoulder plane will quickly remove just enough material for a smooth glide. And with this sled built, let's see if it works. For the boxes, among other applications you can see on the box build videos, again, link below, I utilize this to make crosscuts on a stack of veneer, using a scrap of MDF on top to keep the cut clean, as the thin, fragile wood is torn into by the spinning blade. For miter cut, shift the sled to the right slot and tilt the blade to 45 or 44.9 is what I like to use degrees for tight fitting miter edges. Test the fit and you should see sharp results. Alright, sled works, saw works. No big surprise there because the saw is awesome. Let's make sure we are entirely dialed in and make a quick test box. Pretty tidy if I don't say so myself. And that wraps up the combo crosscut and miter sled. It's a versatile jig that will serve you well for both tasks. And folks, I am fresh out of jigs to show you, for today anyway. And that wraps up this video. If it's helpful, grab a screenshot of the shop notes for reference if you'd like to take a jab at making these yourself. Follow me at Sawyer Design on all platforms. My YouTube channel should be linked below. And especially thanks again to SawStop for the opportunity to raid their channel and get a chance to share with you. Be sure to check out the other builds of the series right here. We'll catch you on the next one. Peace.